Hi, and good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're located. I am going to be here to present to you Tony Velleca, who will be presenting how AI can increase your efficiency of your SOC. Before we get started, a few housekeeping items I want to go through. First, if you have any questions, you can ask them at any time. Please use the Ask Questions tab located below the player. Ask your questions, and we will have them answered at the end of the presentation. So we'll wait until the end. Also, there's additional resources for you to check out underneath the Attachments tab below the player. You can download these items at any time. At the end of the webinar, please take a moment to rate this presentation and provide any feedback using the rating tab below. And finally, a recorded version of this presentation will be available using the same URL shortly after we finish. So please feel free to share it with your colleagues. With that, I am very excited to introduce the guest speaker today, Tony Velleca. He is the CEO of CyberProof, which is a leading provider in managed detection and response services. So Tony, if you would, take it away.
Sounds good. Well, welcome everyone. I appreciate you joining the session today. The topic of the discussion is how AI improves the efficiency of your SOC. But to be honest, I was hesitant to use the word AI because one of the things we find when we talk to customers is that term is vastly overused and it can mean many things to many people. So with that one caveat, I'll say that what we're going to do today is try and drill down on the term and understand what it actually means in terms of algorithms, the way it produces value in the SOC itself. So Jill, if you can go to the next slide real quickly. So here's part of what we believe is that you're probably seeing it, but the next phase of our existence is going to require us to understand how we interface with machines. And you've seen a lot of movies about how machines take over, but the reality is that humans are going to be augmented by machines here very shortly. And we need to understand how that creates value, particularly when it comes to security operations. Security is one of the things that is, in my view, being disrupted very quickly by, the changes in technology. So many more the threat landscape is increasing, but the ways people can, the number of systems you need to protect, the complexity of those systems. It's moving into applications now. It's getting far more complex, and humans alone aren't able to keep up with the demand. So this becomes the new frontier. The other thing you'll note is many of the innovations that are happening in AI themselves become a result of cybersecurity. So what we'll do today on the webinar is we'll focus how AI can augment the capabilities of human analysts to increase the effectiveness of your security team. Steve, if you go to the next slide. I probably don't need to say too much about the trends in cybersecurity and AI, but there are a couple of notable things. In the last year, there have been tremendous investments made by companies, and CyberProof is part of UST Global, which works for the digital enterprise. We work for very large companies. And this is the year that most of them have started picking up on terms like not just talking about RPA and talking about algorithms to understand their customers better and things. It's the year that companies have actually started really focusing on implementing. So it's not just the initial companies. Most companies have a plan to do this. And you can't, a day doesn't go by that you won't see major. Microsoft talked about investing $1 billion in OpenAI this year. And most people are democratizing AI, meaning that it needs to be out there for everybody to use. But the key is really getting the right data and applying it to the right problems. We can run to the next slide. When it comes to the SOC, there's two key roles that are there. We typically call them L1 and L2. But the the first role, what they're actually doing in most cases is taking alerts that are being generated by a SIM. They're looking to see whether those should be escalated to a team to conduct an incident, most probably say. If you drill down on the work that's performed by that job function, 80% of that effort is really enriching alerts. So it's running around the different systems, understanding whose IP address this belongs to, whether there's a vulnerability in that system, what type of, maybe looking up the kind of indicators of compromise and understanding, what might be the intent. But there's a number of enrichment tasks that are going. And in the phase we're in, a lot of these enrichment tasks, when put in context, can be done by machines. A lot of the challenges as we get into this, and when we talk about buzzwords like AI, we start looking at the idea of false positives and false negatives, and we're trying to find ways to get discrete answers to this. We'll talk a little bit about how we break the problem down, but when we talk about AI in general, it brings back a probability. It's maybe 80% that something's here, but so we need to combine AI and the SOC with other means to be able to get to a discrete answer if possible. The third is really looking at what can we do around pre-planning, and there are other ways of looking at this problem. There are algorithms that are considered AI that can be used to understand the way people make decisions and develop planned responses and planned escalation procedures. And what we really want to do, in my view, in the L1 phase is free up the analysts from doing the work that is low value, move them into the work such as threat hunting, which is the latest buzzword, and to really identify areas where take the next step in the attacker where you may not have detection rules and see if they have penetrated these areas. Now, when you get into incident response, the problem changes a little bit. It becomes a time-critical response. So this is where there's two ways AI can get involved. First is looking at one thing machines do better than humans is they can read every article out there and they can understand the latest attack methods. They can run math equations very quickly to understand where the probabilities are for next steps in attack. They can have a good knowledge of your changing network and assets so that topology is available. And this knowledge can be brought to bear at time-critical things to be able to aid the decision-making process for human analysts. Let's drill down on that a little bit. We go to the next slide. The problem in the alert triage or the L1 is really today most AI is being put into things like anomaly detection or into prevention technologies. And what that is resulting in is the ability to generate more alerts. And those alerts now, they can give you better data, but at the same time, we're overloading our security operations team with more and more data. And we need to look at how we can enrich a lot of that using AI technology. This is potentially in terms of bots or virtual agents. And number two is really figuring out how to refocus the analysts on the things that humans do better, like doing some threat hunting and those types of activities. So so what we did to understand this was to really break down the human brain. We said, what can we do to understand the brain and the way we think today, and look at the functions and understand which parts of the brain can be aligned to the different problems. So in the human brain, we have motor functions, which are aligned to things like muscle memory, where we can do do things automatically. We have higher mental functions, which puts the puzzle together and makes decisions, makes judgments, and things like that. We have an association area, which brings a lot of these other functions together. We have sensory functions, which align, your touch and other bits to help you interpret that. And we have visual functions, which do like pattern recognition or image recognition and things like this. If you go on to the next slide. So in the Can you go to the next slide, too?
Are you not seeing a change?
No. Are you guys still seeing the brain anatomy?
Well, you should be on the sensory functions.
Okay. All right. So on the sensory functions, so let's break these down. And apologies if our system's not keeping up here. The on the sensory functions, when we put that in terms of a security operation, we have generally logs, which are discrete events, which are coming in. We have a SIM, which is processing rules. Today, we have things like user behavior analytics, which are machine learning algorithms, which are essentially giving you additional alerts that say, hey, I noticed this, and this is not normal behavior, so you should investigate. We have network and device behaviors, which are devices that are looking, again, at normal behavior and deciding what's different. And today we have things like anti-malware, which are signature-based but have even moved into deep learning with products like Deep Instinct. And if you look at the way the human brain and sensory functions, what the job is to interpret these different signals. In context to the SOC, as we get more and more, we need to basically determine which ones are important, and we need to put some context around that. And this is what the human body does. But in the sensor today, what we're seeing is most of these technologies being put in, but less focus on taking the multiple technologies that are multiple alerts that are coming in and putting sense to those so that we can make decisions. Let's run to the next one. The next is around motor functions. And most of you who have played sports know that after multiple times of practicing, you get something called muscle memory. And if you apply that to a security operation team, as you see more and more events, we shouldn't be doing these things ad hoc every time. We should learn from the way we're doing them. We should develop automation so that if we see things repeating, so that we're removing work out of the security operation team. So this may not be AI, but it's also a piece of what we do. We learn from the past, and we automate as much of this response as we can, so then the analysts can focus on new things. The AI that's applied here, and this is where you're seeing RPA, is algorithms called reinforcement learning. And what these do is these are developed by Stanford. These are algorithms that understand the way what's going on, looking for the repetition, but more importantly, they're trying to understand why people are making the decisions that they're making in the process. Go to the next slide. So the next is visual functions, and this is extremely important. So in visual functions is a part of your brain which is taking a lot of the, when you go down the street and you see something, your body is interpreting a lot of light signals, and it's then it's creating that into a perception. So it may say, hey, this is a person, this is a car coming at me, or something like this. It also controls eye movement, this part of the brain. So it also says, where should I look next? When you look at it from a security perspective, this is what we're seeing in a technology is how can we create a picture of what's happening. We call that observables, and present it to the analyst, so the analyst can very quickly interpret and compare these patterns back to other historical patterns to say this may be what's happening. This may be this type of an attack, or this may be even a threat actor. So many threat actors have similar patterns of attack, use different techniques, and this is where these visual functions can be used to put the patterns together and recognize attacks. Go to the next slide. And of course, you have the higher mental functions. Now, my point of view is at this point in time, the higher mental functions, things like problem solving, thinking, planning, creating judgments. These are things that humans still must do, and they'll probably remain things that humans must do for a long time. But there are ways of interacting and getting recommendations, because this is where machines actually can do things better. If you take Watson, for example, Watson might be very good at chess simply because Watson can understand all the different chess moves that are available and be able to look at 3 or 4 steps ahead. So where AI will likely play in here is bringing a lot of these inputs together, understanding the patterns, but the way the interaction happens would be potentially a conversation. What is the questions like? What is the probable next step of an attack? So we see certain patterns happening, calculate where those next steps might be so we can conduct some threat hunting. What is the potential target of an attack? Understand where the attacker is going, looking at the patterns and saying, all right, they're probably hunting around for data to steal, or they're looking for systems to disrupt, and understand intent, which helps you then with the defense. Looking for similar assets. So if we see that a hacker has used a certain method to attack a vulnerability, it'd be nice to know what other assets are there, which might drive the work for the analysts. So these, what we're seeing today is technology around AI for having the ability to work with an analyst to be able to answer some of these questions is where we believe would be most useful to a security operation. And then finally, the association, if you go to the next slide, the other area of the brain is we call the association area, and this is where it all comes together. This is where we take these various inputs and bring it together. And we believe that shows up in security operations as the ability of bringing all the information together, and something like, development teams love Slack and other tools like that because they can see everything in one place. They can look at the series of events that are happening, and we believe in the world of security that's an extremely effective way of bringing people together. You can see the historical, and it allows us to create at the end of the report, keeping it all together. But in that view of chat, this is where bots can interact with humans. So we can ask these questions that we showed before. We can present the information tactically. We can do automatic tasks like enrichments based on automations, but it allows us to bring it all together to shorten the time, for example, of an incident. And so we believe these are the areas that can have a huge impact in terms of SOC. So if you go to the next slide real quickly, we also believe that bringing it all together and shifting to more of an outcome, what are we really trying to do in security operations? So most of our clients today have understood that it really doesn't matter how much money you spend on prevention. There's still a, not even a remote, but a real possibility that an attacker can breach you. And you must do all the things that are required from a regulatory compliance basis to do this, but no matter how much you spend and how much you do and how vigilant, there are still ways to implement attacks. So the next thing you can do when you look at it from a response perspective is to look at what is your response curve to be able to minimize the damage to a potentially a level which reduces the risk, so the magnitude of loss. So we're seeing in the industry 2 types of breaches that are focused on. One is the data breach, because we have good metrics on what the losses are, and then because of business continuity disruptions where we have good disaster recovery planning today to be able to say, here would be the loss if our production systems were down for a week. So these 2 type of scenarios, we have really good numbers to say, hey, if we can address the attack, within detect and respond within a certain amount of time, then we can reduce the magnitude of loss within an acceptable area and reduce our risk. So this becomes the shift that we think is happening in the market and where AI can apply towards changing the model. And just to go to the very last slide here, and we'll open it up for questions. So our fundamental hypothesis is that, you know, if you look at the market, you'll hear everybody say that we just don't have enough experienced cyber humans available. And the problem is getting bigger and bigger as the attack surface area is getting larger with more, you know, endpoints and IoT and more threat actors and more complexity around applications and cloud and other types of frontiers. So today, what we see is a lot of the AI adoption is around prevention technologies, which is producing more alerts. Tomorrow, we believe AI must start looking at how we help humans make decisions and deal with the exploding number of alerts, fundamentally reducing the time to respond and mitigating the damage of these attacks. So let me stop there, and we can open it up for questions.
So if you have any questions, please type them into the chat. And I have a couple here, Tony, if you're ready. So first question, are security professionals at risk of losing their jobs to AI bots?
I personally think the answer is no. The demand for security professionals today is at an all-time high. Matter of fact, if you look at the numbers in the industry, the real challenge is there aren't enough security professionals to go around. Most of them, most of the security professionals end up working for large companies, but the, say, large financial institutions. But if you move down market into middle tier companies, they're struggling to find people that can address their challenges. So my view is it's only going to get worse, and we need to do a combination of training as well as AI to accommodate just to source the minimum demand that you're seeing in the market today. Is there another question?
Yeah, what do you think of the term AI-enabled humans?
That's a good question. You know, it conjures up the image of, you know, a patch on your head or your brain where you're communicating, you're plugged into the matrix, right? I believe what you're going to see from AI-enabled humans in the short term would be what we kind of showed you in that chat ops environment. It's where you're able to communicate effectively with AI technology to be able to answer questions proactively. And then I think you're going to see it in terms of reinforcement learning. So you're going to find out that what you're going to find is as you do things, the bot starts learning and takes over a lot of these activities. But I don't think you're going to see, you know, we're starting to see the application of things like HoloLens and the SOC to be able to visualize things better. But I don't think anytime soon we're going to have a plate plugged into the head where you're part of the matrix. But I do think just that AI-enabled will probably show up more into how bots interact in the collaboration areas.
Okay, with that being said, in what ways will AI change the architecture of the SOC?
That's a really good question. So, you know, today a SOC, you envision a lot of people staring at glass. And the idea of staring at glass, I believe, will likely go away. We may not need the large screens, except in the case of looking at macroeconomic type of effects, right? Looking at, you know, attack patterns and things. You're going to likely see more breakout rooms for incident response, and you're going to see probably, in my view, I think we're going to need fewer humans staring at glass. We're going to need more humans doing things like threat hunting, which would be, you know, intensive work on the computer still, but it'll be more exploratory as opposed to watching alerts coming in. So that's the fundamental number one. The second is I think you're going to find this interaction in the breakout rooms or war rooms. Think of them where you're doing a response. You're going to be able to do this more globally. You're going to have, if we do this correctly, you're going to find more context available to third parties to come help, particularly as you get down sectors. I think many security operations outsourcing firms are kind of a black box. They handle mostly the alert triage, but once we're able to use technology to be able to come in and provide more context, you can move up the chain in terms of the incident response and be part of that team. More collaborative aspects will be able to add more value in terms of that.
All right, we have another one here. How do you feel that AI is impacting the development of the next generation of security platforms?
This is where I think we will see a shift, and my view is that we've had an explosion. If you just looked at it from a VC standpoint, there's just, if you've ever looked at those product categories, there's thousands of products that are coming out, and they all claim they have some sort of AI in it. And these thousands of products are generating more and more alerts. And my belief is now the problem is shifting to how do I look at this is what I call micro. A lot of these are designed to solve one particular problem or look at identifying certain different types of attacks so they can be responded to. I think the shift has to be, how do we help the analysts respond to those more effectively now, right? So I think it's going to work, it's going to move from detection to response, and it's going to be around putting larger patterns together. How do I take all these sources of data? I want to look at them all, but they'll put that puzzle together in a way that I can attack the problem faster. And this will be algorithms like attack pattern recognition. These will be looking at even identifying attackers potentially by things. We'll start seeing the MITRE framework become much more impactful in terms of identifying techniques. And then I think you're also going to see potentially AI looking at reading and consuming knowledge before it's available. So for example, CVEs are a source of vulnerability information, but these are published far before attack. MITRE comes up with a technique and publishes a technique. So how do we get ahead of the curve? How do we get closer to 0 day when these new techniques are available so that we're ahead of the game? So my belief is this is where we'll see the next generation of investment in AI focus.
All right, I have another one here. Do you see exercises between this AI and L2 cybersecurity professionals as a way to maximize their technology?
Way to maximize their technology. Yes, I think if I interpret the question better, once you start seeing, one of the things that's interesting is security is a set of layers of technology, and I didn't mention this. I think it was in the presentation. I neglected to mention it. What we would really like to do is look at security from the standpoint of risk. And what that means is if I know an attacker is going after a high probability scenario to steal my data or disrupt my systems and they're making progress, then I want to focus my efforts there. So by the same token, I can also see when it comes to risk factor, what technology is producing, the most value in terms of detection or protection. Because you have layering, you might find that a piece of technology that you put in recently makes another piece of technology obsolete, so you can remove that. So you will have the data now as you go through these processes and you look at these algorithms to start asking questions like, do I have an optimal technology stack? If I remove this, how much risk am I, how many vulnerabilities or how many controls are now missing, or are these controls handled by a different set of technology? So I think the short answer is yes. I believe there's an opportunity here as we get lots of data, we look at alerts, we look at the effectiveness of the different technologies to make some decisions.
That would be it for the questions. Anybody else have any more questions that they would like to present to Tony? All right, I'll give it a minute here. There was one question about getting copies of the slides. There is a link and attachments at the bottom that has a copy of the presentation as well as other information from CyberProof.
And we would love your feedback on this so we can improve the next one, but this obviously has some forward-looking opinions and points of view in it, but I know there's a lot of security experts on the phone. We'd love to get feedback. Intend some of them to be a little provocative so that we can get critical feedback and see whether we're all heading in the right direction. Okay.
All right, with that being said, thank you, Tony, for your insights. I really appreciate it. This was great. And with that, we will be ending this meeting. Look forward to your responses to feedback. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.